Well, our guest this morning is Michael Spies, or Speesy. Welcome to you, and a career that spans skiffs, ocean racing, Sydney Hobart races, Hamilton Island races, almost around the world. So welcome to you.
Thank you.
Hunters Hill and Lane Cove, that's where it all began for you. Talk us about your early days and growing up.
Probably even preceding that. In the early days we were living above the funeral parlour, and my father got back into sailing after a stint in motor racing, sailing moss, and then he got a heron, and I started crewing with him when I think I was 3.5 or 4. Then we did move to the Lane Cove River there, sailing with him out of Balmoral every Saturday and every Sunday, and sailing, crewing in sabots out of Hunters Hill and Lane Cove on the other days of the weekend. So yeah.
So basically you began in the heron, then the sabo, and then graduated from there to where?
We were quite competitive in the herons. The heron was a huge sort of class in those days, 100 plus boats there. When we were state champions, we were always top 3-ish in the nationals, and we were going all around the country. We went overseas. We won the Inter-Dominions in 67. And then in 68, we actually progressed to the NS14s, the Northbridge Seniors. But in the meantime, while I was sailing with my father on the Sundays, my father was sailing either moths and then into fins on the Saturday. So it was the whole regime of the family was totally, sailing focused.
And with the North Shore 14 with your dad there?
The NS14s, yes, yeah, but we were too light, and we were competitive again. We're top 3 or 4, but just the people were surrounded within the Frank Bethwaite's, the Julian Bethwaite's, the Mark Bethwaite's. We were always, and Bethwaite's were making a lot of gear for us, and bits and pieces. It was quite a technical thing. Even when I was very young, I was quite interested in the technical side of things.
So obviously a good grounding with, racing against those guys and in big competitive fleets. So where did you go after that, as far as your skiff sailing was concerned?
Well, probably my big break, my parents got separated, and they were both living at Hunters Hill, and one on the Parramatta River, one on the Lane Cove River. I moved in with my father, and we'd gone into flying 11s. And the bay we lived in, we had champion sailors there. We lived next to Dave Porter of KB fame. Next to him was the Rays, Margaret Ray, which was Ian Perdrier's wife. Then we had Michael Coxon there, and we just all brought up there. We're all around Hunters Hill Sailing
Top
Club.
skiff sailors, yeah.
All good sailors, and Michael Coco was sailing their flying 11s and top of the game there. And we were just sort of one peg below him, a couple of years younger. But
were you steering then?
Yeah, always steered. And we'd been successful in the sabos. We'd won a couple of states in the sabos, so we were always reasonably competitive with reasonably good equipment. We're always working on equipment. I'd always work in school holidays. That was the deal. I'd have to work in school holidays to afford a new sail or contribute to it, and it was quite a disciplined but well-programmed thing. I used to go into Elstrom Sales in the school holidays and work there and cut out numbers.
With Mike Fletcher? With
Fletcher, and McDiarmid was there in those days, and Bruce Hewish, and there was a lot of, it was a good thing to do. And
a great grounding for you. Yeah.
Very, very good, and it gave you the background, of what went on, and then I tried to diversify every school holidays and work somewhere different, like in a chandlery. Other sail makers, I mentioned Bruce Hewish, Freshwater Sails, who was the gun in skiff sails in those days. And
you'd learn a bit about life as well with Hewish.
You would, yes.
That's for another day, I think.
Exactly.
Day. Yes.
But no, it was a good grounding. And then, out of the 11s, I never won a title in the 11s. We were always just on the podium or just off it, but winning into club races. But
a good training boat. They still are, aren't they?
Brilliant.
11s.
Brilliant.
Terrific little boat.
I just think the Australian training boats that we have compared to the European boats, that's why we've produced so many great sailors, really. I mean, they're just just good, solid boats, so far ahead of their time.
Yeah. So from the flying 11s, we took a step up?
Well, we were racing the sabos on the Saturday. The 11s on the Saturday at Hunters Hill, and then I'd hang around Hunters Hill Sailing Club trying to get a ride on a 12-foot skiff. Someone didn't turn up on a Sunday, and I was hanging around, and I used to get an occasional ride with a guy called Peter Cowie. He'd lost his arm in an accident, and he was sailing a 3-hand 12, and then I used to jump on him with another guy called Duncan Rutherford, who went on to be a champion skiff sailor as well, and fill in there. And then out of the blue that winter, we were going to build a new Flying 11, and I got a call, and this is probably the biggest turning point, from a guy called Phil Stevenson. He'd seen me hanging around the club and said, would you like to do a 12-foot skiff program I'm building a new boat. He had pioneered the stitch and glue concept, the boats. Brilliant man, still is. And we're still very good friends to this day. And so I'm only 14 at this stage. And to make the Inter-Dominion in those days, you know, there were 80 odd boats, 90 odd boats, guys building new boats, and wouldn't even get a look in of representing Australia. So we weren't that good at Hunters Hill Club, which was a strong club for 12-foot skiffs. Michael Coxon moved to the 12s, and he was dominating there. But we had the state titles, which I think your late father Lionel used to start. And a huge event, rig up Clifton Gardens, and they're not exaggerating, 70 or 80 boats there. And I think we qualified 4th or 5th, and I was the youngest guy ever to have qualified for the Australian Inter-Dominion team. And
they took the top 12, didn't they? 12 boats,
yeah, 2 Queensland boats, I think. Yeah, I think the Queensland boats might have just come in after your time in the class. But huge accolade just to make it. Like CYCA didn't make the team that year, for instance. Certainly made up for later years. Yeah, we went and got, and then we're racing. I met a guy called Ian Murray. It was his first season in the 12s. Warwick Brooklyn was sailing with Mark Anderson. There was a great camaraderie there. The gunboat at the time, a brand new farboat, AWA John Levy, he dominated the States, but coming to Dominion, we did a lot of work on the rigs. We built the first square top mainsail ever seen in a skiff. You know, Phil Stevenson, he was just so innovative.
Yeah.
You know, I tell people this and they just laugh. Like, our second rig was a stainless steel mast, and he had no money. Well, he was making his own sails. And, you know, he built the boat. I used to get the train out to Riverwood where he lived with his parents, and, you know, just the workmanship and what he did, and plus he was designing other boats for other people in the fleet and selling plans. So the guy was just an absolute genius and highly, highly underrated. Like, Bruce Farr had come through that regime, and I mean, he was more innovative than Farr. I know that's a pretty wild thing to say, but, you know, that to me was what I learned in that year really, really stood me good. And we actually got 3rd on points in the Inter-Dominion, 3rd overall, but we'd retired from a race because there was pressure on us before protest. Steve-O, being the sportsman he was a marginal cross, I think, and we finished up either 4th or 5th, and Ian got 3rd, and then Ian went on to greater things. And yeah, so that was probably the big turning point. You know, I was very, very young, and, you know, being surrounded by these guys, these adults, and sailing with them, and
good people too, good sailors and innovative, and as you say.
Well, and if you couldn't make it yourself, your neighbour could. You know, I mean, it wasn't like you're down the Chandlery and buying things or going to fabricators. No one had any money, and it was great. It was a really good learning, something that stayed with me for a long time.
So did you stay with Steve-O for long, or?
No, he then went back to his other career. I did other 12-foot skiff things, you know, and I was in and out of the 12s there. But in the background of what happened, my father had bought a half-tonner. He was doing Tempest's Olympic program, and he was off overseas, and he convinced my stepmother it'd be a good idea to get a family boat, and we're looking at a Columbia 34. And I remember he dragged me aside. He said, "I'm just doing this to keep Maureen, my stepmother, happy." He said, "We'll get a race boat, don't worry." And,
yeah, Columbia 34 is hardly a race boat.
So we finished up with a little Triton 28,
right,
which happened to fit the half-ton rule, very small for half-ton, and he campaigned that, and we were rating under the half-ton limit, and then we put a bigger rig in it, and he went off overseas, and he left me the half-tonner, so I'm still at school. My school's on the water, and he's overseas, and he said, "Oh, you better go and stay with your auntie." Well, I did cut a deal with her. She was getting the meal money from my father, and I'm living on the boat at school, tied up to the rowing pontoon. And we're doing the CYC Winter Series. And once again, I'm 15, I think, at this stage, 1974, 75. And we campaigning, and all my crew members are my schoolmates, except one who used to be at a school up the road at Lane Cove and used to ride his bike down, and we used to go on Lane Cove River and train. And we started off, and this is the day where they were all production half-tonners, Currong 30s, East Coast 31s, and we were further back than fullback. We were hopeless, you know, we were making mistakes and wine glass and all that. But we got to the stage where we got really, really quite good. I'm talking 30 half-tonners on the start line, mixed fleet with the quarter-tonners there, which was about 15. Huey Trainer just launched CYCA and Mukau and lining up there, and hectic starts, scratch starts, and they did have a handicap thing at the finish. Really good sailors.
So this was your real first introduction to the CYC, I guess, and those
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, I had done the level rating regattas as a crew member on the half-tonner. But, you know, to his credit, my father was quite liberal thinking. He said, well, you know, you're competent, and we used to take the boat away in school holidays. And I remember there was a good sailor here called Greg Gilliam, Groggo, and my dad phoned me and I said, look, can you take the boys up to Pittwater so they don't put the thing on the bricks on the way up? And I remember Groggo phoned up my dad and said, mate, those guys don't need help. He said, they're great. He said, and that really sowed the seeds. And getting back to the half-tonner, we got very, very, very quite good. You know, we were top threes and fours, and every lunchtime at school we programmed at periods. We're out on the Lane Cove River practising jibing bloopers, you know, reading. Bobby Ross used to publish a thing called Windward Magazine and Windward Newsletter, and tell you how to peel the spinnaker. So we got the latest Windward Magazine, how would we peel the spinnaker? And we actually got quite competitive, and a lot of guys helped us. You know, Billy Radcliffe had a boat here, the Hankins boat, Fuzzy Duck, Graham Aborn, Hot Bubbles. A lot of guys actually took us under their wing and thought what we would, you know, there's no youth academy in those days. You had to create your own gigs. And yeah, but you know, if I look back, we won a race. It was a highlight. It was huge. It was absolutely huge. You know, beating all these other production half-tonners, and you know, it's a pity that whole. Then it became an arms race because the Worlds were here 2 years later, and we're all of a sudden finishing up in far boats and all these beautiful competitive cruiser racer that had parity were basically obsoleted to, you know, twilight boats basically.
So I guess you saw in that time, being introduced to the club, all the famous ocean racing boats here at the
Well, even going backwards a step, I probably missed a chapter there, and I did the Sabo Tolers in Hobart in 1970-71, and we got second in the Sabo Titles. And I'm down in Hobart, and my father was down there when we used to watch the boat come in. I remember Buccaneer got line on us that year, and Pasha won it overall. I'm just in awe. You know, I couldn't get off the water quick enough with my Sabo, and I just used to stand there, and my dad used to go, we've got to go. I know. I said, I'm just happy here. And I found, you know, and I vowed then that that's what I wanted to do, you know. And we're fortunate enough to live on the water, and I had my rowboat and I had a little tinny and all that. And there was a boat in our bay called Carousel, a Tasman seabird. And even as a young age, I just used to row around and just look at that thing in absolute awe. And I remember it's funny how little things stick in mind. I remember it was owned by a guy called Milton Brakel.
Brakel, that's him. Yeah.
And he had his own slipway a few doors around from us, and he, I remember he said, I'm rowing there, and he was putting on a brand new prototype set of Barlow chromed winches, and they just sparkling. I just thought, oh, and they were huge. You know, now you look at them and you think, oh yeah. But I just used to row around that boat for hours, just sitting in there looking at it in absolute awe. And yeah, so going back to that, I knew what I wanted to do. You know, that's me, and that's, you know, I set my goals there, and then I'd go training in my Sabo, and I'd sail my Sabo here and tied up out the front of there, have my little pocket money and just walk, you know, help guys fold sails in the park and all that. And then just regressing a little bit, when we got the half-tonner, Gordon Marshall, the late Gordon Marshall, good friend of both of ours, came and measured the boat, and Gordon took a shine to me and sort of took me under his wing, and if I was around, I'd be holding tapes for him, measuring and all that. And you know, he was a very, very solid and guiding mentor to me. But yes, you're right, I met a lot of guys, including yourself, hanging around here just looking for a ride. Like, to get a ride in those days was impossible. Like, no one wanted to know about young guys. Now there's a transition here, but You know, I remember sailing on, having to get rides on Endeavour 24s in joggy races, Stardust, Buster Rickard, you know, and overnight, you know, you just look back and you think, what were you doing out there?
Yeah, well, so then how did you get involved fully into ocean racing?
Well, probably from the half-tonner, you know, we had some credibility, and guys just didn't take young guys on their boats anymore. And as I said, you know, we had a lot of support. Merv Davey, you know, I didn't know who Merv Davey was. He said, what you guys are doing out there is unbelievably good, you know, and because we're 15 years old. And, you know, and as I said, guys like Billy Ratcliffe and that, and I was sort of hanging around here just trying to get anything I could. And then I think my first real big break came on a sail with you guys on Frizzle. Graham Freeman asked me to sail, do Montague on Natal. And I was shot on the foredeck. We had some really good guys and we won that race, and it really, you know, I was hoping to get a Hobart ride before that. And I didn't, and you were trying to help me out. I actually sailed back on Love and War, and I did a lot of the lead-up races on Love and War and then post-Hobart because I didn't quite pass muster to get a ride. And then it went from there, and then I did my first Hobart on a boat called, we were actually at the presentation for up at RPA for the Montague Island race, which we won. And Tony Pearson said, look, I've just launched a new one-tonner, would you like to come and sail with us? And that was my first Hobart, where we had some pretty big names on that boat. You know, Sidney Hammond was navigating.
Cole Betts was he on board?
Jimmy, I sailed with Cole the next year on Ragamuffin. Jimmy Burke. Tony was a very, very good campaigner. Pete Cavell was there. Just trying to think who else, but it was a...
So that was the first of your 46 races to Hobart?
Yep. Yeah. Wow. So, and wasn't a good result. Piccolo won that year. We didn't do a particularly good job. The boat was a Lidgard design and was probably a little bit out of balance. It was probably a bit too much in one corner. The sail program wasn't
so from there, where did we go as far as ocean racing was concerned? You were still...
Well, I was still in and out of skiffs. You know, doing skiffs, and it made it a little bit hard to commit to a full season down here and all the long races. But then I got a call from Sid. The boats had come back from the Admiral's Cup, and Sid said, do you want to be my forward hand on Ragamuffin? And I said yes. And that was the 77 Hobart, 77 Hobart, where Kurloa won, we were second. We only had to average three and a half knots or something, 4 knots maybe from Tasman to win the race. And that was a really, really hard race. I remember Sid, I was on Sid's watch, and Sid said, I've always dreaded this. He said, every other year in a blow, we've always had an east southwest. He said, this is a dead muzzler. But I just think back, you know, great seamen we had. I think Billy Lawler was navigating that year, Cole Betts, Dickie Norman. You know, I was fortunate enough to have some really, really good mentors. Earmarking me for, you know, seamanship. You know, even though I think back, you know, compared to what we do now, you know, they talk about the good old days. Well, these are the good old days in terms of safety. I mean, you know, I don't even think I put a harness on that boat, and I was changing storm jibs. No life jackets, you know, I mean, you just wouldn't even contemplate doing that now, but that's how things were done in those days.
But you mentioned the skiff program. I mean, the 18-footers then were part of your life?
Yeah, I got into those pretty early. We'd finished our HSC, and...
How'd you go in that? Topped in sailing? Was that a course?
Topped in sailing, yes. Yeah. No, I was actually used to do the barest amount to get away with and get a good result.
Right.
Yeah, sort of looking over people's shoulders when you're doing the test.
Sorry to digress.
No, we came through all right, and but never was sort of earmarked to want to do the university bit, although I did do a bit of post-tertiary stuff. So we did a HSC, and then we bought a 12-foot skiff. My best friend, then David Hodson and myself, we bought one of Warwick Rookland's old boats, dragged it out, hadn't been sailed for a couple of years, and we qualified again, went to New Zealand, and went for the Indominions again, had to weren't too good over there. We were great in the States, and we had a few breakages over there. I think we dropped the rig by memory. And then got back
Maybe
here.
some early nights too, over there.
Yeah, very early nights. Yeah. And we got to, I got back and I got a call from a guy called Nicky Masterman and said, do you want to come and do the 18 Nationals with us up in Britain? He had a boat called Knockin' Kirby's, which was a wooden far boat in the second season. It wasn't a bad program. And I jumped on the 18, did some club racing out of the league on the lead up, and I was basically, I think I had over the years 16 or 17 years in the 18s, and that was the start of it. And then we went again next year, the three of us, Johnny Dean, Nicky Masterman and myself, in no particular order. We built a new Colmar boat. Nick was working for Fletcher at Elstrom's. I was involved in the construction, had those two left hands of mine working pretty well, and learned a lot about that, but we missed the team. We missed the world team. They only took 8 boats, and we missed out. I think we were number 9. We came good at the end of the year. Learned a lot again, and basically in and out of the 18s, did a sail with Woody in Perth, where we got second to Ian Murray, in and out of there, and then...
But ultimately you won the big prize, didn't you? The JJ's twice, is that right?
Yeah, won the JJ Giltons in 93 and 95. Mm-hmm. Took a fair while to get there, had a plan in my own head. We were quite innovative. I was sort of involved in I saw how they did things in motor racing, preparation, presentation and all that, and I tried to adapt that to our philosophy. Our trailers were always painted, everything was polished, everything was properly presented, we were properly presented. Reliability, we wouldn't, not necessarily always the fastest, but we were probably the most organised.
Yeah, but like in anything, well prepared. That really counts for everything.
Yeah, and presented and aware that you're ambassadors to your sponsors, and I'd like to think we sort of moved a lot of that to a sustainable level, with presentation, that, we were just so much more organised in the park. Our boat would always roll over the same way because all the pins were facing the same way, just attention to detail. And I was fortunate enough that we had towards the end, not when we restarted that program, we had no money, but towards the end we had reasonable money, and I could actually sustain a sustainable wage out of it and just focus on that, and it was a year-round job. Like we finished the season and I wasn't doing much overseas at that stage. You might try to get away for a holiday and go and do Hamilton Island or something like that, but we'd be building next year's boat straight away, and we're always first in the water, and we're always dominant the first part of the season, and people would catch up to us, but we did a reasonably good job with that.
Well, Michael, you were cramming a lot in with your 18-footer and skiff sailing, but you were doing the Hobart race each year. I mean, it's sailing was obviously dominating your life, and we could talk about every race, but let's just talk about, I'll take you to 90, the bad race, 98.
Yep.
Just talk us through that, what you were on and how you survived that.
I was sailing with Ray Roberts, with some pretty good operators on board, Ian Murray, Gordon Maguire, Fresh Burns, Richie Ellenson, just to name a few. We just launched this Sydney 47, built a hull produced by Sydney Yachts and then finished off at McConaughey's. It was late in the water. We did the Southern Cross Cup lead up, and we were pretty competitive. And we got a great start out of the heads there. It's the days of the Nelson Marriott Quest and Sid's Farboat, and we're a fair way ahead of those, and we're having a pretty good race. But just backtracking a bit, I remember Roger Badham, who was very close with Ian Murray and still is, came down and said, mate, I don't like the look of this. He said, just be aware. He said, things aren't going to plan here. And obviously the modelling and everything was far removed then from what it is now with the technology we have now. And he said, just expect you guys to get a hiding. So we started the race, and we're absolutely on fire. And I was always on the big fella's watch on Ian Murray's watch on that boat, and we had our default thing. We said, look, when the breeze gets round to like 002, almost north, we're going to be the first boat on the other jibe because that's the start of the trend there. So we got through the jibe and it was starting to get fresh, and we hung onto it, and huge amount of current out there, pushing us north to south, and then we could just see we're dropping Quest off and Sid off on the horizon, like miles behind, like where we're just absolutely sending the boat. Adrian Carlin was navigating for us that year. I forgot about Adrian. And it just started getting fresher and fresher and fresher, and we changed chutes, and we probably shouldn't have had to shoot up, and we're pushing hard, and Gordon's steering. And it's night time by this stage, and there was a bit of radio action. I think Louis had lost a guy over the side. There was a little radio chatter. It was starting to get quite fresh, even though the breeze was still northwest at this stage. And then all of a sudden we hear this bang, and the boat goes into this massive windward skate, Chinese jibes essentially, lays flat, rudder's gone. At the same time, we're all hooked on down the back of the boat, all strapped on, and Adrian Carlin's making her way to try to keep the nose out there right when the rudder snapped. And you see the Toyota ad, the guys jumping, oh, what a feeling, jumping up in the air, and the boat, the impact of it, she's airborne, Adrian. And Nick Kingsmill, one of our crew members, managed to jump up and literally and visualise it like yesterday, plucked her out of the air. She wasn't clipped on, and got her on deck, and we picked up the pieces, and then I think we were officially the first boat out, no rudder. Tried to get the boat back ourselves. Coast Guard came in to Batemans Bay and got us out of there, and you could just hear all the radio contact there, what was going on and all that. And
it was a horrific race for many reasons and all the wrong reasons. But just after that, I won't dwell on it, but you got involved quite heavily in the safety side of the wash-up, didn't you?
While every tragedy's compounded on this, we learn from them. And, if there are any upsides, and hard to find upsides when you've lost good, close friends, we're a lot safer now. And the CYC, to their credit, and I don't think they get enough accolades for that, very much got on the front foot. They had an internal review, which was way ahead of the then New South Wales Coroner John Abernathy's review, and realised there were some shortcomings in what we did, because we hadn't had a wake-up call since the 79 Fastnet, really. Another tragedy, and so unfortunately it seems to be we need events associated with tragedy to sort of get a bit of wake-up call. So that was the previous one, and whether we got lax or a little bit complacent, I don't know what the answer is, but there was definitely some shortcomings, things such as batteries, life jackets, life rafts and all that, and there was a full review, and the CYC, as I said, do not get the accolades they deserve for that, and we thought they came up with the concept that the training was quite poor, and they introduced what they call safety modules. And the CYC, I got a call from, I think it was Peter Bush at the time, saying, can you get involved and with Ed Soltis and present some heavy sailing components, what you know, and Ed had just won that race on, so we sat down, did a couple of notes, and then every Thursday night for a couple of months we were up at the High Kingsgate near the Coca-Cola sign up there, because the club wasn't big enough, where we were to go to Hobart the next year. They'd now said you had to go through X amount of these safety modules. So there was one on heavier sailing. The life raft rule hadn't really been introduced, but use of flares and all that. And so Ed and I were up there talking about heavier sailing, shortcuts, how we, when I say shortcuts, how to change sails, how to look after sails, how to, clip on and all this. And Ed, to his credit, was had a lot of credibility. He'd won that race in a very small boat and handled the conditions perfectly, and I was sort of his wingman. And then that morphed into what we have now, the SSC, the Safety of Survival at Sea. And
you're an instructor in that now?
Qualified
instructor.
Really, so we just use that knowledge, and we all move that knowledge over. But what people don't realise, that basically, that curriculum that was sort of sown here in a very piecemeal sort of way, even though there was an overall view, is now the basis of the SSC course. And the CYC passed, they didn't want to administer it, which I think was a mistake. I think that it would have been a lot safer and more productive here. Our club administering it on behalf of Australian sailing. But now the RYA, that the curriculum hasn't changed much at all, and certainly the life raft drill and all that's been there. But we were quite passionate about safety way before it. When we actually became aware of it, went and did the 85 Transpac race, where you actually had to sign a declaration to have someone in the water and do the man overboard drill. And I just realised, we threw a guy called Robbie Naismith off the boat, off the waters of Marina del Rey there, and without telling him. Time we got him back, we were totally unprepared. So, that highlighted to me the importance of safety, and I've sort of been quite passionate about it since then.
Yeah. Well, I want to take you to the next year, Hobart race. Brought you success.
Yep.
Line honours.
Line honours, race record.
In Nokia.
In Nokia, the Volvo 60. Yeah.
Volvo 60. Good run all the way, basically, wasn't it? Easterly, strong easterlies, nor'easterlies.
Yeah, that wasn't meant to happen, by the way. It wasn't meant to happen, sort of caught them napping a bit there.
What do you mean by that?
Well, going back a little bit further, we came very close to putting a Volvo 60 around Whitbread, what was then the Whitbread Round the World race campaign together. We were a long way down the track. We didn't make a big song and dance about it, so we'd been sort of working towards that. So we had a little bit of, understood a little bit about the boats and all that, and it fell over politically at the last moment. Australia hadn't had an entry in the Whitbread at that stage, so the opportunity came. There was meant to be a 2-boat program. I was meant to get the second boat, the original Yamaha, and anyway, one boat came up, and it was a joint venture between the Danes and Australia, and I put some good guys on board, Mothy, Steve Jarvin. I managed to get my say on the navigator, Vincent Geek, who navigated Rothmans, who I'd sailed with on the Rothmans program a handful of years before. Barney Walker, who'd sailed with Dennis Connor. I figured we needed someone who'd done that, and there was and a couple of other Australians. There were a couple of Nokia representatives on board, but on paper those boats shouldn't have been able to beat the Wild Things and the Brindabellas and the Days, but the planets aligned for us. We got the dream run, pushed it pretty hard, and did a pretty solid result. Apart from breaking the boom vang, which we did early in the piece. We got there totally unscathed, and we took the record. I think it was 2 days, 12 hours.
14.
So what would we go to? What was Kilo? Kilo was 2 days.
14, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think we're 2 days, 14. Anyway, we knocked a short day off it, 20 odd hours off it.
Amazing run, really.
Yeah, and it was quite interesting. And then they allowed the hundreds in after that. So it really, because prior to that, it had always been an upper limit of 70-foot IOR, like the old Maxi style. And then when they went to IMS, they measured Congier, which was the last drum beat, and said, well, that's the number and that's the ceiling. And then went to IRC, so there was continuity performance-wise there, and then they allowed the hundreds, which really opened up the whole new game.
So Nokia that you won line honours, she was water ballasted but not canting, is that right?
Water ballasted, not canting,
okay.
Which was quite a big deal in that stage, and we had to get dispensation and to do it. And as I said, on paper they were not as fast as the Maxis of the day, but we got the conditions that needed. And
so you were rolling off Hobart after Hobart, line honours victory, but still handicap had not come in your way. But take us to 2003 when the stars aligned again for you for the Hobart race.
Well, what happened after the Nokia thing, they opened the limit to 100, the 100 footers. And, chasing around getting corporate sponsorship and putting a program there was just, it wasn't going to happen again. We knew the Neville was building 100. Neville Crichton was building 100, and there was whispers that Bob Oatley had one coming after Neville and all that. So, chance of us, an underfunded team that's where your name isn't on the rich list, was never going to happen again. So we started focusing on trying to win it overall in handicap, something that eluded me prior to that. And the boat of the day was, believe it or not, a Bente 40.7. So I chartered one with the support of P&A and Ed Lloyd for 2000, We threw some new sails at it. We had our own ideas how to make them go a bit quicker. And because Michael Model had done a pretty good job getting 2 fruit machine and Smile up and running, and we tried to take that development he did to the next step. And it's easy to say, but we were way ahead of on that race on time. And then the rudder broke proprietary. There was a bad batch of rudders, and we finished up with them. Then the next year we won, got 4th overall. I put a boat together for my solicitor, a guy called Ashley Reid, and we were quite strong. We'd won a lot of races around here, and we'd won our division. That was the year Bumblebee, the Sydney 60, whatever it is, Sydney 61, and we got 4th overall. That was a good result. Unfortunately, Ashley died in my arms on that boat in the Mooloolaba race. I sort of took the boat over with another owner, and I chartered. We had a bad race in, so that's 2. We'd broken the rudder, and I said to the guys, "We've just got to keep turning up here. Our name's going to come out of the hat. You know, we've got a good boat here." So we had a good result 01, bad result 02. We parked up at Tasman where we were pretty well placed. We weren't going to win it, and then 03. Once again, the planets aligned and got a bit of a break with the weather, which you need. You know, without big noting, we did sail well and really pushed the boat hard down that Tassie coast. Like we were on the edge there, ounce and a half shoot up, storm shoot up for a day and a half, like, you know, and 36, 37 knots of true breeze, and we just held on. It just kept rotating, everyone except myself. No one wanted to know about the whirl. And yeah, took it on, and you know, that was a pretty solid result.
Yeah, I think you won corrected time well over an hour, so that was a great victory. But look, let's fast forward. Well, no, not fast forward. Just talk us through some of the, you know, other Hobart boats that you've sailed on that people might recognise, that have given you a good fun, maybe not win, but that you've had, and the characters you've met. I mean, we could go on forever. There'd be a few people that would stand out, or boats that would stand out.
I mentioned earlier in the interview with Triton 28. Well, I've always been a bit nostalgic, and I guess, you try to be humble, but we've all got a little bit of ego. I thought it'd be a good idea to do Hobart in a boat that I owned. So this is 92, and I'm fully entrenched in the 18-foot skiffs at that stage. And before the internet, I bought the Sydney Morning Herald and I found this little ad down the bottom, for sale Triton 28. It was going pretty cheap on a mooring up at the other side of the spit. So I came down to the sailing office. Bob Bernack was then the sailing manager. I said, "How do you feel about a Triton 28 going to Hobart?" He said, "Oh, for you, we can make it happen." So I went and bought it, and along with another fellow club member, Steve Barlow, and it was a wreck. And it's only about a month out from Hobart. So I said, "Steve, I've ponied up the money," and I said, "I've got to sail the skiff on Sunday. You take it down to Botany Bay and pull it out at Dave Mackay's there." Anyway, got down there Monday morning, the boat's out of the water and big beard on it and all that, and I thought, geez, that rudder looks dodgy. That rudder really, that big scatter-coloured rudder. No wonder we struggled back in the half-ton days. And I had this rush of blood to the head, so I got a diamond saw out and cut the whole rudder and skeg program out and stepped back, and it's about smoko time. And I had another rush of blood. I thought, I'm looking at this massive hole in this bottom of this boat that's got to go to Hobart in a month. I thought, what have I just done? And so I've got this, cut the whole rudder and skeg program out. It's a 4 foot by 3 foot hole. And what am I going to do for a rudder? What was I thinking? You know, so, and we'd written an 18-foot skiff off the previous year, and a Murray boat. I had a whole heap of centreboards left over, and I thought, I'll just build an 18-foot skiff centreboard on the back of it. That'll work. And spoke to Mackay, who's a bit of a visionary, Dave Mackay, Australian Yachtsman of the Year, 1969, and he's still celebrating. And I said, "What do you think about, I just bolted a rudder on the back of this?" He said, "Well, you've got the reverse counter on the transom. You're going to have to straighten it up, of course." I said, "Well," he said, "get on the bandsaw there and chop up some timber. I've got some nice old timber that's been aging there, and away we go." So I've glassed up the bottom of the boat, doing all the work myself. And then I had another rush of blood to the head. I thought, geez, that rig doesn't look too flash. And I'm sailing with Will Finlay and the 18s, who own Pearl Grey Marine. So I've gone around there. I said, "What, have you got any old sections here?" He said, "I've got these Proctor sections." He He said, you can have one. So built a new mast for it. Literally started the mast Friday morning. By Saturday morning, we found a masthead crane for it. I've got the rig standing in the boat. Worked all night myself. Gardo stood the mast and made the rigging. The next 24 hours we built and it was a glamour mast. It was perfect. Raked the spreaders back, and it was just a perfect thing. Came up with this Triton 28, bottom all glassed up now, all looking good. Rudder on the back, and I said to Michael, is that going to be strong enough? He said, well, it has to be strong enough. He said, you've had 3 blokes jumping up and down it trying to, there's an 18-foot skiff centreboard and has a break. He says, there's going to be less load there, highly technical. He said, you know, if you're nervous about it, he said, just put another layer of glass on the outside. So I did that. And yeah, we got third in our division. That was 1992. So with a guy called Roger Grimes on it. He's talking about characters. Grimesy's turned up. I said, you're right. And those who don't know Grimes, he would have been about 68 years old. Another good mentor of mine, Qantas pilot. Turned up with this wet weather gear with DMR on the back, Department of Main Roads. And it was quite funny. People, well, my mates had got wind. Normally about that time, my mates would be saying, what are we going to Hobart on this year? Must have been a sort of before WhatsApp or any of that. Don't answer Spies' call. He wants you to go to Hobart on a 28-footer, not friendless, absolutely friendless. So we've got this pommy guy who's turned up off the dock. And he said, I'm looking for a ride to Hobart. I said, well, I'll be able to take you.
Get on here.
Get on here, mate, you're on. So Grimesy used to smoke these Gaulois cigarettes, stunk, these French cigarettes, buster hanging out of his mouth. And this pommy guy's got the best looking wet weather gear we'd ever seen at this stage, and about 3 cartons of silk cut cigarettes. So he's crook as Rookwood, he's bound for the count off Bondi. So Grimesy's straight into his gear, off comes the DMR gear, and Grimesy's never seen it so good. Straight to this guy's busters, smoking away. So the guy's come good, anyway, he's come good down the Tasmanian coast on us. He said, oh, can I get my gear back, Grimes? He said, oh, you can have mine. He said, what about a cigarette? He gave him a carton of these Gaulois.
Yeah.
So we got third in division. Billy Ratcliffe beat us in Marara, really well sailed S&S 34 and another good S&S 34, but we gave a good account of ourselves, but you just couldn't do that now.
No. Well, let's roll forward quickly. You're now, well, just recently, less than a week ago, you've won the inaugural Southport to Mackay race, ocean race.
Yep.
Long race.
520 miles.
Yeah, in a two-hander. You're now going two-handed, and that for Hobart, this year's Rolex race, two-handed.
Made a big commitment.
In Katwinchar, the boat was launched in 1901?
1904.
Yep. Right, so it's an old boat, but it's been beautifully restored by yourself under your guidance at Maritimo.
Well, more under the principal, Bill Barry Connors. I came in at the end of the program.
Bill supporting the program.
Yeah, Bill's great.
Just quickly talk us about two-handed sailing. I mean, you've been fully crewed up till, a couple of months ago. You did the Gold Coast race, Noakes Gold Coast race two-handed in Katwinchar, and they carried on to Mackay, and now you bring it back for the Rolex Hobart race. Yep,
different discipline. Didn't realise, was quite confident in our own abilities, Peter Verkergus and myself, my offsider, and just realised how little we knew, and how good the guys out of this club are doing it. Rupert Henry, the bar's high. We thought we'd slot in there or thereabouts, but it appears that we have sort of slotted in with some sort of respectability, but we've got a lot to learn. Different discipline, how you handle the sleep, how you handle the meals. You've got to be a lot more regimented, a lot more that, and we're learning all the time. Obviously I'm not getting any younger myself. You've got to manage the sleep, got to curb your enthusiasm. Not every sail change happens like that. You've got to plan things ahead. The navigation, where I always relied on a good navigator that I can liaise with and come up with the tactical decisions. Or
but now you've got to do it yourself.
And we'll get stronger.
Different
and stronger.
Mindset, absolutely.
A different mindset, and probably one of the better things I've done, to be honest, Peter. It's early days, but.
So, as I said earlier, 46 Hobart races under your belt. Will we get to 50?
Well, God willing, yeah. I mean, hopefully, we're obviously slowing down a bit and it is getting harder and harder, but keep going while we can.
So you've got a lot on your plate. You're an IRC measurer, you're a safety inspector, you're an ORC measurer, you're on the race committee at Hamilton Island. You have been for many years. You did
28 years I've been a
handicap
handicapper there.
So you'd have to say sailing's pretty important in your life.
Oh, it's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Every part of every day. There's not something that phone's not ringing and all that. So
Well, that's great, isn't it? That's great. And you're living on the Gold Coast these
I live at
days?
Sanctuary Cove, moved there 2011,
Great.
which is great. And
Well, Speesy, it's great. I mean, I've known you for a long while. We've got some good memories. I hope you'll always call in at Wineglass Bay on your way home from Hobart.
well, it's given.
It's mandatory, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it's absolutely given.
We hope for good times there again.
yeah.
But anyway, look, thank you. Good luck in this year's Hobart race, Rolex Sydney to Hobart race. I know it's a very important part of your life, but thanks for all you've done for sailing. I mean, you've been a great contributor, but you've given a lot to the game as well, and we're very thankful for that. It's people like yourself that make the sport what it is. So good luck, and look forward to seeing you on Boxing Day.
And thanks, Pete, and thanks for this opportunity, and thank you for seeing some light at the end of the tunnel with me and taking me under your wing, 40 plus years ago.
It was a pleasure. All the best.
Thank you.